All right, joining me now is my guy Tony Jones covering the Utah Jazz for The Athletic. Tony, thank you so much for hopping on, man. I'm excited to always reading your coverage, but I'm excited to continue to read about the Jazz this year.
Thanks for having me, and I definitely appreciate you thinking about me and reaching out to me. And I'm happy to be a part of this, man. I'm excited.
Of course, like who else could there's a lot of awesome people covering the Jazz. Don't get me wrong, but like you're my guy. You're my guy down there. I want to be able to get the best, so might as well, dude. Um, the Jazz are in an interesting place. They won 37 games last year, made the trade midseason for like trading away Mike Conley and kind of going a little bit younger. Uh, and there are some interesting things with this team. Kind of could go a couple of different directions. What would you say is the most interesting thing about the group right now while your boots on the ground?
I think the most interesting thing for me is that they are right now kind of like a sailboat without a rudder. I think, in my opinion, that they have one of the best front courts in basketball. I think Lauri Markkanen, Walker Kessler, and John Collins and Kelly Olynyk. I mean, you look at the size, the length, the athleticism, the versatility, and the skill sets of those guys. I mean, in my opinion, there just aren't that many front courts out there. But then you look at the ambiguity at the point guard spot, and you look at the fact that we're less than 2 weeks in, and we kind of we're less than 2 weeks away from opening night, and we just kind of really don't know who's going to not only start at point guard, but close games at the point, have to take the lion's share of minutes at the point. And it's a huge thing that the Jazz, need to figure out, not only today, not only in the next 10 or 11 days leading up to the regular season, but, as the regular season starts, the first 20 games, the trade deadline and beyond that. So I think that it's just kind of fascinating, the contrast of, the Jazz being set in some places and being very unset in some other places.
Yeah, Lauri Markkanen, major breakout last year, kind of continuing some of the good stuff that he did in Cleveland. John Collins, Walker Kessler, Kelly Olynyk, like that's a great mix of talent in that front court, as you mentioned. I could make an argument that there are four different players that they could start at point. That they could go with Colin Sexton, like who they've been starting in the preseason. They could go with Jordan Clarkson, or they could go with Keontae George, or they could go with Chris Dunn. Like I think you could make an argument for any of those guys, and I'm not sure what
they can also 5 players because they can also go with Taylor Horton Tucker.
Oh, just like big wing point guard style, like
Yeah.
that's an interesting take. I hadn't heard. Oh man, 5 guys, and like, is there a great option among that bunch for you? Like who would you start if it were up to you?
I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to say who should start if it were up to me, because I'm not going to campaign for this, because
Sure.
I think legitimately it's that much in the air. And the thing I will say is that we still have as much ambiguity now as we did at the beginning of training camp. I will say that there hasn't been one guy that stepped forward and played, so above the rest that, it's right there. I still think that everybody's just kind of bunched in together and on the same tier right now. So what I'm confident in saying is that Keontae George is the future of the position. He's the guy that has star level upside, like legit star level upside. He's the guy that the Jazz, want to be starting, whether it's sooner rather than later, or whether it's somewhere down the line this year, whether it's next year. But all 5 of these guys, they do things that, are good, and they do things that are not so good. Like, Chris Dunn is by far the best defender of the bunch. Keontae George by far has the most natural talent of the bunch. Taylor Horton Tucker bends the defense off the dribble better than anyone in the bunch currently. Colin Sexton is the best in transition of the bunch, and Jordan Clarkson, if you just put the ball in his hands, he's going to score. He's going to get you 20 points a night. I don't think it'll be Jordan Clarkson, just because I think that he's that much of a two guard, and that the Jazz need him, scoring enough that's probably going to take him out of the mix. So I do think that your starting point guard is going to come from one of the other four guys.
It's a wild that's a wild thing to be waiting on when you're in camp and in preseason. And I mean, we're recording this on October 13th. The season for the Jazz is 12 days away. Like there's not a lot of time left, and it might have to go into the regular season in order to figure something like that out. And that could be frustrating for a lot of people, but we'll see how it breaks down. You mentioned how the front court is kind of set, how the front court is kind of like, you know what that group is going to look like. How does that evolve? Because I think that there are still some weaknesses within that front court where you play so big, and there are some teams that you could do that against and be perfectly fine, but there are some teams where they'll try to spread you out and they'll work sometimes and not work some others. So is the vision going into it still going to be Markkanen, Collins, Kessler? Is that the starting group that they're playing around with, or is it going to be maybe some ambiguity there as well?
No, I think that's probably going to be the group. That's the group that's been together for most of training camp and both preseason games. I will disagree with you a little bit. The funny thing about them is that Collins and Markkanen are both athletic enough that they can both guard on the perimeter. So, it's one of those things where, unless you're, a really, really elite team on the ground and off the dribble, I don't know that having Markkanen and Collins on the floors and trying to spread them out is really, I don't want to say the way to go. But I think that, those two can hold up well against that. And, obviously Kessler is really good protecting the rim, like elite at protecting the rim. So, the weakness for them, in my eyes, isn't what they, team trying to take advantage of them defensively. I think it's a team trying to take advantage of them offensively.
Sure.
Because I do think that the weakness of Markkanen and Kessler and Collins, that group, is the ability to put the ball on the floor and have self-creation on the offensive end. So in relation, some of their production, I'll take Markkanen out of that because I think that he's gotten to the point where it doesn't matter who's on the floor, he's going to produce anyway. But
Sure.
some of their production of those guys are going to be tied to the point guard play. So we get right back to that original issue. So last year when Mike Conley was on the team for 40, 45 games, 50 games, it wasn't so much of an issue because Mike Conley is, one of the best playmaking point guards of this generation, of this era. But now you have Taylor Horton Tucker and Colin Sexton, and you have the inexperience of Keontae George, and you have Chris Dunn, who's an elite level defender, but not an elite level passer. So how is that going to tie in to the production of the front court? Can they get those guys the ball where they need them? So the two things are going to come of that. Number one, I think your point guard long term for this year is going to come from the guy who fits best with the front court. And secondly, I think the front court, the ceiling of this front court is going to be really tied to what they can get out of the point guard. So, the difference here is, okay, you go to another front court, go to the LA Lakers front court. Well, it's nice to have a point guard, but you don't really need a point guard because you have LeBron James. You go to you go to the Denver Nuggets. Right. It's great
Right.
having Jamal
Yeah.
Murray, but if like Jamal Murray sprains an ankle and he's out for 10 games, guess what? Nikola Jokic can do all the playmaking.
Yeah.
So there's not a playmaker in the front court for the Jazz that can hold up without a point guard. So if if whoever's Utah's best playmaker from that backcourt position goes down for a sprained ankle for 10 games, then the Jazz are going to have some issues there.
Is that Lauri's next place of development? Maybe like because he has a similar profile to guys that are elite play finishers, whether it's as a shooter or as a scorer, as a driver. Like he is a good play finisher, but he has struggled at times to get other guys involved and really drive the offense in that way. Could he take on some of that playmaking responsibility and be a weapon as tall as he is in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, the hope is that he can develop that part of his game. Um, I think the bigger hope for the Jazz is that he develops as a closer, because right now he has the profile of being the second best player on a championship level team. So part of his profile from going from that to potentially being the best player on a championship team is being able to close games out, being able to get you buckets in the last 5 minutes of games off the dribble against the loaded defense, against against having, a primary defender and then having one guy, on your left and one guy on your right and another guy playing weak side. Can Lauri develop that part of his game in the last 5 minutes of the game? So I think that's the bigger, hope or worry for the Jazz. But, I think that he's come along a little bit, even in the time last year since they traded, when they traded Mike Conley. So, it'll be interesting to see what his evolution is. I watched him in Seattle against the Clippers, and the Jazz were basically kicking the ball all over the arena, and Lauri Markkanen still came out with 13-6 at halftime without really touching the ball as much. So he's developing to a point where it kind of doesn't matter who's on the floor around him, he's going to get his. But can he get his when it really counts?
We will see. That's going to be an interesting factor, and like you said, very much tied to the point guard play, and very much tied to just being put into a position to succeed. I do think that the coaching staff has done a great job of having these guys put into good positions, at least initially, and we'll see whether they can continue to push that way. Will Hardy, I really like as a coach. All right, let's do this then. What would you predict them to win? If I asked you to do a season win total prediction, I had them so they're 37 last year. I have them at 33 now, just with the question marks at the point guard spot. Where would you put them?
I would go ceiling floor. I think that if they get good point guard play, I think that the strength of the Jazz is they have a great front court and they're really deep and they have a really high level of athleticism collectively throughout the roster. It's almost unjazz like. Well, it's very unjazz like because we don't think of the Utah Jazz in terms of being athletic, but this team is going to be really, really athletic. Really long and really athletic throughout the roster. So if they get good point guard play, I think that their ceiling is they can finish as high as 6 in the West.
Wow.
If they don't get good point guard play, or if they get average point guard play, then they're going to finish 11 or 12. I think that the median is somewhere in between. I think that the level of athleticism on the roster, how hard this roster is going to play night to night, and the level of coaching, because Will Hardy is a very, very, very good basketball coach. I think that they're going to be in that play-in hunt when it counts, and that's going to give them a chance to try to make a run at being in the playoffs. So it's we've everything right now with the Jazz, it's just all going back to what level of point guard play they're going to get, and and it's to me it's almost 100% tied to their ceiling and to their floor, and even to the median of what they can be this season.
Well, Tony, we will see what happens with this group. He is Tony Jones, covering the Jazz for The Athletic, and also doing some Nuggets traveling. So I'm excited to be able to see my guy Tony in town. Should be a lot of fun. Tony, hey, thank you so much for taking the time with me. Really appreciate you and all the coverage that you're going to do for the Jazz this year.
My God, thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to doing it again.